for downloading this episode of Cork Talk with me, Tim Atkin. A weekly conversation with some of the most famous people in the world of wine. Jen Parr started out working in the software industry after studying English and Spanish literature at university, but moved into the wine business after she did a harvest in Gaillac. 33 vintages later, and entirely self-taught, she's one of the best winemakers in New Zealand. A woman with a passion for Pinot Noir and other grapes, a great palate, and bags of energy and ideas. As she puts it, she always chooses what is interesting over what is safe. Hello, Jen, and welcome to the podcast, the first of 2025. How are you?
I'm great. How exciting, the first.
You're the first of the year, man. I mean, we just got into the year. And thanks for doing this also at the end of the day. I mean, it's 10:30 at night, isn't it? Where are you? You're in Central Otago in Wanaka, I think?
I am in Albertown, a little suburb of Wanaka. And it's the eve of heading back to the winery after a little Christmas summer break. So I'm armed with my Shannon from a friend of mine in Hawke's Bay and also a cup of chamomile tea.
Okay, a bit early in the morning for me, so I'm on the tea rather than the Shannon. Right, so much to talk to you about because I love you. You're brilliant. Everyone here, you've got an American accent. You were born and brought up in Oregon. I think your family lived close to the Willamette Valley, didn't they? I mean, were they involved in the wine business?
They still, most of them live within an hour and a half with traffic from the Willamette Valley. And no, none of them have been remotely involved with wine. My brothers now have a reasonable interest in wine, but nothing like what I have. And my parents didn't drink wine at all. So quite a coincidence.
And do they drink your wines now? They must be proud of you, right?
Yeah, they do. It's hard to get in the States, unfortunately, but I always bring as much back as I can when I visit.
Take it over in your luggage, right?
Exactly.
I mean, you're interesting because you didn't study winemaking, at least formally. And many of my favourite winemakers didn't study winemaking as such. And your bachelor's degree was in English and Spanish literature at Stanford University, very posh in California. I mean, it sounds like fun. Are you still a keen reader?
Well, to be really honest, I should read more. It's sort of feast or famine with me. I'll either read, a book a week or I'll go a month or two without reading. But I do love reading. And I just need to make more time to do it, to be honest.
And do you speak Spanish or not?
Well, there was a time when I was conversationally fluent. And to be really honest, I decided to study English because I couldn't think of anything else that inspired me as much when I was at university. And there were great professors at Stanford. And I love Shakespeare and Chaucer and a lot of people from your neck of the woods. And but I also had taken Spanish language since I was a kid. And I was the only person to have a major that was English and Spanish literature. So part of the reason why I picked that was just to be truly unique. But since
just to be different, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because I don't know if there's ever been anyone since who had English with an emphasis on Spanish literature. So was trying to stand out from the crowd, I guess.
No, so do you have anything as ambitious as a career plan?
I had several career plans, Tim.
What were they?
The first was I wanted to be a lawyer.
Yeah.
And I scrapped that pretty quickly and thought that I actually wanted to be a politician, but I wanted to be an altruistic politician. And I kind of felt like that was never going to happen. And then I wanted to be a teacher, which is also altruistic. But when I was 20, I felt like I would only have the patience for kids who wanted to learn rather than the ones who probably needed teachers. And so I was kind of confused and I didn't know what to do. But I was pretty onto it in terms of knowing that I should just embrace the gift of going to an incredible university with amazing professors and study something that motivated and moved me, and books and language and the art of debate and listening and discovery through words and communication really was really, really something that I was interested in. But how do you find a job in that if you're not going to be a lawyer or a teacher or a professor?
You don't.
Yeah, exactly. So
you're exactly like me.
For those that don't know, Stanford's located in the Silicon Valley. And in the 90s, I'm aging myself now, was kind of the beginning of .com. And so technology, home of Apple, Hewlett Packard, Oracle's, all of these things. So I just applied to whatever wasn't banking and, management consulting and that kind of thing. And there were a lot of these software startups. And one of them that was started by a Stanford history major and philosophy major, et cetera, that happened to be making really, really geeky, financially engineered risk management software, needed someone to help them out in marketing. And lo and behold, I took this job, and that was me. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you did it for 7 years, though, didn't you? You lived in San Francisco, obviously, which is nearby, New York, great place to be, and London. I just wonder what being in sales, okay, it was financial software, but it's still selling. What did that teach you?
Well, it was actually more like 9 years. And when I started out, I was just sort of kind of like a gopher or a, reasonably educated PA. But I quickly saw that marketing wasn't so much my thing. I was more into sales. I loved being involved in contract negotiation and finding opportunity and then relationship management. And I just overheard the bosses talking about how they needed to send someone to the New York office, this little satellite office, because that's where our clients were. So the technology was in San Francisco. So that's where the business and all the people were, but they needed to get the software to the people. So I heard them saying, we need to find someone in New York. And I walked in kind of conveniently and said, I'll go. Never been to New York City. San Francisco was massive compared to where I grew up. And they kind of looked at me like I was sort of crazy. And they said, well, why don't you go out there for a weekend or a week and see if you like it? And off I went. It was the most terrifying thing I ever did. And then I did it again when I went to London, and I did it again when I came to New Zealand. So moving places sight unseen, seemed to be kind of a thing for me. So I basically, to segue to how it relates to wine, is in financial software, I was selling complex, very expensive things to, very specific people. But the software was so complex that as financial engineer couldn't manage the business side of it, find the deals and negotiate the contracts, because they were quants. They were, all about the geeky stuff that the software did. The salespeople couldn't run the software to save them lives, because they were all about the relationship management and finding the deals and negotiating the millions or whatever. So you had to work in a pair. And I found that quite challenging, because I'm selling something that's really expensive that I didn't really even understand. I was supposed to be reading, the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times and derivative trading, this and that. And I would open the Financial Times and read the wine column. I wasn't interested in any of that. So I decided, what if I could find something to sell that I could sell by myself? And then I was actually interested in, and I actually wanted to read the books and the technical papers that were relevant to what I was actually doing. And I realized that, wine was probably that thing. Because when I moved to London, I started taking all of these wine classes. They're pretty high level. They're kind of like WSET, but it would be specific to, say, aged Rioja or, white Burgundy or wines from South Africa, with really good teachers. And I was always the first to be there, ask the most questions, would drag my friends along. And I was spending all my free time going to wine classes.
And then 2002, you packed in your job, didn't you?
Yeah.
You went to pick grapes, right?
Yeah. Well, you got to start somewhere. And grape picking is actually probably one of the hardest jobs in the trade.
I agree.
Backbreaking, and it's. I became a winemaker to avoid picking grapes, to be honest. No, I think you've got to do it. And there's I haven't picked grapes everywhere, but the most delightful experiences I've had were picking grapes in France. For some reason, the backbreaking work never seemed to feel the same in France as it does everywhere else in the world.
In France. And why Gaillac? Why did you go to Gaillac?
Well, why not go to Gaillac? It's the oldest wine growing region in France. It's beautiful. There's castles. There's grapes nobody's ever heard of, made by people who are incredibly passionate and talented that nobody's ever heard of. Makes perfect sense. Actually, when I was living in London, a colleague who became a very dear friend of mine, who was Canadian, he and his wife bought a 200-year-old farmhouse in the southwest of France and kindly allowed me to go there on holiday, and it was quite easy to get from London to Toulouse. And so I went there a lot. And at that time, wine was my near obsession. So every time I go anywhere in Europe, I would look up, it was before the internet is what it is, but I'd read books about, what food comes from that area, what grapes are grown, what wines are made. And there actually was this little region of Gaillac in proximity to Toulouse. So I'd make the journey out and taste wines. And I got to know a local producer. And I wrote to them when I left my job in software and said, can I come pick grapes for you? And they said, bien sûr, of course, we can't pay you, but you can come. So I set my plan, to the 2 weeks before I was set to leave, given away or stored all my stuff, bought an old lemon of a Volkswagen Golf off a friend of mine. So I was, a right-hand drive in France. It was a disaster. But I get a letter from them saying, we're sorry, but we've sold our vineyard and everything will be machine harvested. So there's nothing for you to do here. And you can imagine my heart just dropped. So what was I going to do? I didn't have an apartment in 2 weeks. But there's always a silver lining. And this is when fate definitely shined upon me. They said, but we've talked to our friend, Patrice Lescaret from Caus Marine, who consults to us. And he's a very good winemaker. And he takes international people. And he's happy to have you if you're interested. So I dropped him a note and he said, sure, here's the address.
You work with him?
Yeah. And I arrived scared to death in this old lemon of a car, drove from where I was staying to Caus Marine, this vineyard. It takes about an hour in that car. And I show up on site and it was all a buzz because there was a mobile bottling machine. So now I know that bottling time is really intense and it's, the last chance to get something right. And there was this very skinny guy with a big nose wandering around, and I didn't speak much French at the time, but I best French. I said, excusez-moi, je cherche Patrice Lescaret. And this man looked at me and he looked around and he said, moi aussi. And off he walked. It's like, okay. Am I meant to follow him? What do I do? So I stood there a while longer.
And that was
Somebody
him.
else comes up and I said, same thing. And they pointed to that dude. And that was kind of the start of an amazing friendship. And that was him. He's always been searching for himself.
So tell me that in the next 6 years, you've done that first picking job. You traveled the world really doing harvests. You did lots of harvests, Australia, France, again, South Africa, which was important for you, I know, and New Zealand. I just wonder, where did you feel most at home? And where did you learn most? Was it, New Zealand, you obviously developed this emotional bond with quite early on, didn't you?
Yeah, I think New Zealand certainly is where I have made my home, I think made the most difference and the place that resonated and I felt the most opportunity. And so by virtue of that and the time I've spent here since 2003, I've learned more in New Zealand than, anywhere else by a multiplier. However, there have been moments and times in other places, in Oregon, and in South Africa in particular, and then of course with Patrice, where had I not had those experiences, I might not have ended up in New Zealand, or I might not be who I am today. So if I had to pick one place, it would be New Zealand, but there've been people in other places who've really helped me on my journey.
What do you think of the advantages and disadvantages, if that's also apposite, of being a winemaker who learned by experience, who's doing it on the job as you've done? And I think you've done, 33 vintages now? I won't tell you how many I won't remind you how long you've been doing this, but it's quite a long while. But still, 33 vintages is a lot of vintages.
Yeah, and I said I wasn't ever going to do 2 a year, and I was done doing overseas harvest. And then I had an opportunity just a few months ago to go to Hokkaido, Japan, my new favorite country in the world, and work a harvest. And I was like a kid in a can. It really renewed all of those wonderful emotions and inspiration to learn and it just humility once again. So I made a choice. I had just finished paying off a very expensive student loan going to Stanford. And I wasn't, and Stanford taught me a lot about many aspects of what I now know are important for being a winemaker: communication, management skills, time management skills, organization, commitment, how to study, how to research, how to work hard. It taught me all of that. So it was just the specifics of science, and I guess in a way the art and craft of winemaking, because I knew that viticulture wasn't going to be my emphasis. And I thought, okay, a lot of people said, oh, you should go to Lincoln and get that 1-year post back and you'll have the piece of paper.
Yeah.
And I thought, I don't want a piece of paper. I want to learn. And I want to learn specifically what will help me find a job making the kinds of wines I want to make. So I decided to spend the money, probably more money than I would have spent on a 1-year postgraduate degree, to travel and specifically work in places and for people who I believed had something they could teach me. Their wines or their philosophies motivated and moved me. And I think it was, for me, the best decision I ever made. Although in hiring and mentoring young or up-and-coming winemakers, I certainly have respect for the degree. And if that's the way that people want to go, then I encourage it. But I always have an open mind for people who have an alternate pathway like myself, because that too, with the right person and the right motivation, can be a way into this wonderful world.
Yeah, I think you're right. When did you decide to settle in New Zealand, and why Central? Is it because you got the job at Olsen's as assistant winemaker? Was that the motivation?
That's why Central. It was sort of the last place I ever worked, because I'd worked in Hawke's Bay and Marlborough and North Canterbury. And I actually, a longer story than we have tonight, was very close to getting a job in Marlborough. And last minute, they found someone with a little bit more experience. And I was fairly heartbroken because New Zealand was really calling and I really wanted to come to New Zealand, and I didn't know if I'd find another opportunity. But I kept looking, and then I saw that Olsen's had an opening, and the winemaker at the time was a Kiwi, but he had spent quite a few years working in the Willamette Valley in Oregon. And so he knew Oregon wines, he knew, Oregon culture, and he kind of wanted to hire someone that wasn't already in the region. So I just sort of threw my name in the hat, and he hired me sight unseen. And I remember driving down from Christchurch and arriving at Cromwell and thinking it was like the most magnificent place I've ever been. And from the day I arrived, I knew that it was a place I wanted to stay.
Yeah. You fell in love, really. I mean, for people who've never been there, and it's an incredible place, folks, it really is. You're not overselling it. Tell us a bit about Central. I mean, where is it? What are its climatic influences? And a little bit about terroir and maybe the sub-regions. Just give us a brief overview of Central. I know it's difficult to do in a couple of minutes, but if you can just give us an overview for people who've never been there.
Sure. So Central Otago is one of the southernmost grape growing regions in the world. The closest major city is Queenstown, which is also known as the adventure capital of New Zealand. It's the home of bungee jumping, where the first bungee jump was taken. There's downhill mountain biking, alpine skiing, mountaineering. There's a lot of adventure. It's a very dynamic place. And in the mid or early 80s, some sort of pioneering sorts of people, some adventure seekers, came and planted the first modern grapes. And all three of the first groups or pairs that planted grapes had no background in wine. They were journalists, they were merchant bankers, they were scientists, but they felt that pulse, the same thing I felt 30 years later. And so what is unique about Central Otago in New Zealand is that it has a semi-continental climate, which is much more like places in Europe. Everywhere else in New Zealand has an influence that comes from the coast, so what we would call a maritime climate. So that makes it unique. It's nestled in the lee of these amazing mountains where you'll find me most of the time in winter. And there isn't a lot of flat land for planting grapes. It's a very challenging, it's dry, but it has this great diurnal range. So the climate is apt for making the kinds of wines we make here, which is 80% Pinot Noir And then there's other cool climate varieties like Riesling, Pinot Gris, Chardonnay's on the rise. So it's just it's an awe-inspiring place that attracts adventure seekers, people who are willing to push the envelope, and people that don't necessarily want it easy. It's not an easy place to grow grapes, and it's an expensive place to grow grapes. It's an expensive place to live. But if you can work beyond all of that, I don't think there's any better place, especially to be a part of a burgeoning young industry. You need that dynamicism. You need risk takers. You need people who are at an extremity. We're quite far removed from anyone else, so that garners a community spirit. We definitely are all for one for all. It's really a magic industry to be in. I often, at a festival or trade show, somebody will say, "Oh, I was just over chatting to your competitor. Now I came to see what you've got." And I said, "Well, we don't have competitors." And they look at me like I'm this arrogant woman. And I said, "But whose wines were you tasting? Blair's or Matt's or Claire's?" And they're like, "Oh, you know all these people." I said, "Well, they're my friends. And if you like their wines, that makes me happy." Like you don't really, we do keep each other on our toes, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to let anyone down, but to work in a competitive industry where the people around you who are competing for that shelf space or that restaurant listing, you feel like they're part of your same team. It's pretty special. I don't think there's many other things like that, or even not every wine region is like this in that spirit.
No, I agree. I always love going, not been there for a while, but all the people you've mentioned, Rudy as well, and Dean and all those people, Duncan, I think you mentioned Duncan, they're all fun as well, aren't they? It's a good time. Tell us about Grant Taylor, because he founded Valley, which is where you are now. You've worked there since 2015 after you left Olsen's. And Grant, amazing winemaker. I mean, one of the greats, I think, of New Zealand. He was kind of your professional mentor at the beginning, wasn't he? Just tell us a bit more about Grant and his influence on you.
Yeah, certainly. It's another moment where fate intervened in my life. When I was promoted to head winemaker at Olsen's, which no longer exists, the vineyards have been sold to another brand, but they were the first vineyard to plant in the famed Bannockburn area of central Otago. And they had a history with the other two winemakers that they'd employed prior to myself of establishing a mentor for them in their first year. So picking somebody from the industry that they would employ, on a consultant basis, that the winemaker could call or bounce ideas off, just someone, to mentor them through their first year or so. And presumably also so that they could check and say, hey, is this person, up for the job, and are they doing what we need them to do? And so when I was promoted, Heather said, we want to get you a mentor. And we batted around names. And I said, there were a couple of people out of the region, like Larry McKenna, and his great guy, become a great friend. But I thought, well, surely there's someone here. I mean, this is full of talent. And then I said, what about Grant Taylor? He seems nice, and he was always very friendly. But more importantly, I couldn't afford them. But every time I had a chance to try Valley wines, they stopped me in my tracks. And so Heather got Grant on board. And so for about a year, every now and again, he'd just pull into the winery, usually around lunchtime. What's for lunch? And I'd make him a toasted sandwich. And, we'd just chat. And he'd let me know if there was a tasting or something. But when it came the critical time when I had to first put together blends, which is a pretty daunting task if you've never done it before, and I was really left to my own devices. There wasn't a roadmap from what had been done before. And in many ways, that was exciting. But he came and he tasted with me. And what he gave me was the confidence that I knew what I was doing. But just him being there and giving, his thoughts and encouraging me down the pathway I decided was great. So after about a year, he rang up John Olsen and said, whatever you're paying me, to give it to her. She doesn't need me. And we became great friends. And that was 2009. So what was it? Maths aren't my strong suit. So it was about 6 years later that I actually started working with him.
And you took over from him, really? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that we knew exactly what was going to happen, but one thing I didn't realize until after I joined was we have an amazing, one of my colleagues, we're a very small team. So there's we work closely together, and I work very closely with our sales and marketing manager. And she told me that before I joined, he said, "Hey, Hollis, if anything ever happens to me, go find Jen Parr." And I had no idea. I thought, when this kind of came about, but it was kind of the most natural thing. We just said, let's give this a go. And the first year, 2015, we made the wines together. The next year, we moved to a larger winery, which happened to be the space that I had worked in for Olson's for a number of years. So I knew the winery well. And then moving the winery, you're starting over and setting things up a different way. And then what I love about Grant is he's a winemaker. And as a winemaker who's worked for other people, also works for himself, he understood that you don't give someone a job and then micromanage them and tell them exactly how to do it. You give them a job and you empower them to do it. And you're there if they need you. So I didn't know that he was actually going to let me take over the winemaking. And he did. And I'm sure there were moments where he was biting his tongue going, "Oh, you wouldn't do it that way." But the greatest lesson, well, he's taught me so many lessons, but the one that I think has been the most profound is he taught me that there's more than one right way to do something. That's not that original. But he said to me, just because someone else is doing it differently doesn't mean that's not also right. And that resonates with me every day when I've got new interns coming, or, with the guy that works with me, and trying to let them find their own way. And then often you find that their way's better. And if you're not afraid to acknowledge that there are people who can do certain things better than you can, then you're off. You're going to be much more successful and make better wines. And so he's taught me a lot about winemaking, but that life lesson is one, that will guide me to my grave.
I think that's very true. I mean, talking about people who are perceived to do things better than you are, I mean, not you personally, but I mean, New Zealand, you've done a couple of vintages in Burgundy. Is there still a degree of kind of cultural cringe, as the Aussies call it in New Zealand, about Pinot Noir from New Zealand? Or have you guys now saying, hey, we can do this as well as the Burgundians can do it?
I think it's even different to that. I mean, we visit Burgundy. Central Otago and Burgundy have a winemaking exchange where every year we send over. It's not necessarily winemakers; it's viticulturalists as well. And we send 3 or 4 people over to Burgundy to work harvest, and it enables them with visas and finding placements, and they send people here. So. And that's not because we're looking for the Holy Grail. It's because there's so much history there, and it's a beautiful place, and they make beautiful wines. And the exchange of ideas is just, to me, the foundation of winemaking. But I don't think it's because we want to be like them. I think the greatest thing that we're doing, at least in Central Otago, and I see it in the small winemaking areas focused on Pinot Noir, like North Canterbury and Martinborough in particular as well, is that we're trying to make the best New Zealand wines, but more importantly, the best Central Otago wines, or in my world, the best Gibston wine, or the wine that best expresses Gibston. So it's not about trying to be better than Australia or California or Oregon or Burgundy. It's about trying to be our best selves and understanding the uniqueness of this place. So the diurnal range, what our soil differences are, the technology that we have, but also the freedom that we have. And I think that's always been something we've talked about is, we admire the history of Europe, not even just Burgundy, Barolo, wherever, we admire that history. We'll never have that. You can't catch up, right? But they admire our freedom, because we don't have centuries of it has to be done this way. So I think it's really. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there are people who still think that, but I think it's almost a mutual admiration society for the Burgundians of this era who actually do travel.
Yeah, and I like your idea about not having competitors, that the two regions, or all of the Pinot Noir producing regions of the world are kind of complementary in a way, because they're doing different things. That a wine from, I don't know, Patagonia in Chile in Argentina doesn't taste like one from Casablanca in Chile, or it doesn't taste like one from Central Otago, it doesn't taste like one from Marlborough, etc., etc., etc. Really, and I think that's a good thing. I think we're in a kind of golden age of Pinot for Pinot lovers. It's not just, you don't just have to go to Burgundy; you can go anywhere now and find great Pinot.
Yeah, and I think you just have to decide if you're making wine to a style or making wine to a place. And if you're making wine to a place, then in theory, I should never make a wine that tastes like Burgundy, right? Because I'm so far removed from Burgundy. It should taste like the wild thyme and the rose hip and, the things that are around us here. That fruit purity that we is our blessing, is something that we have in spades in Central Otago. That's something that should be celebrated. And I'd imagine, there'd be people who wish that they have that, just like we might want but you can only be who you are, and you have to accept that. To make genuine wine from a place, you have to want to be in that place, and you have to want to make that variety. And if the character of that place doesn't please you, then you shouldn't be making wine there. And it can make you scared. It can terrify you, it can frustrate you, but that's all part of the relationship. It shouldn't bore you, and it shouldn't be easy. And to me, that's, if wine is easy, if it bores you, if it doesn't scare you, then you're not in the right place.
Well, I want to ask you about that, because I read a quote from our mutual friend Bob Campbell, Master of Wine, who's one of New Zealand's top wine writers. Interview with you, he said, if given a choice, I'd choose interesting over safe. Now, I think you were talking about winemaking, but does that kind of describe your approach to life? It's sort of what you're talking about, in a way, that you want to challenge yourself, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a lot of people who think, say from my hometown where I grew up, Milwaukee, Oregon, that I am daring and bold and I'm a risk taker. I live in the land of adventure seekers, so I'd say I'm relatively tame. But I think I'm always striving to go further. But I'm fairly conservative in my risk. I don't want to go off the edge of the cliff, but I'm quite happy to get to the top, where from a safe distance I can see over the cliff. But I think it's about trying new things. It's not staying stuck in a mold. So whether that's risk or not, I don't know, but it's constantly saying, okay, just because we've done it that way 10 times over successfully doesn't mean that there's not still a more interesting way. So you don't just go tick, tick. It's kind of like, okay, but what else is there? Because, the climate's changing. The vines are growing older. People's palates are developing and changing. We're maturing. The world's shifting. So if your thoughts on wine and your aptitude and attitude towards it isn't also, changing or seeking more, then you're just going to be left behind. That's what I love about wine, is it's not stagnant. It's constantly moving.
Yeah.
And so whether it's risk or whether it's just opportunity, I think the day that you get comfortable as a winemaker is the day you should hand the reins on to someone else. When you're feeling 100% sure, comfortable, I think you'll lose the edge, and it's time to say, someone else have your moment in the sun.
Yeah, I like that idea very much. Tell us a bit about judging, because you're a very well-established show judge. You've got a fantastic palate. What advice would you give to somebody who wants to hone their tasting skills? I mean, again, this is something you've taught yourself in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, I had a lovely friend, S.K. Deneen, who's winemaker owner at Maud, who's a fantastic wine judge, who sort of took me under her wing and helped me find opportunity, and again, helped me find confidence in myself. But judging isn't for everyone. I know you've done a lot of it yourself. I think people think you just drink wine all day and chat to your friends, but it's a stamina game. And it also, to me, what I love about judging is you get a group of people in a room that have something in common, but also a lot of different opinions. And to be a successful judge, you have to work well in teams. You have to be able to communicate, but also listen. And to me, it's life skills. And that's what I love about judging. So at the end of the day, you're trying to evaluate in a short space of time whether a wine is of a certain measure or not, right? So it's an imperfect thing, but it's a way of going through a category of wine and seeing what stands out in that context. It's not the only way. You still need reviewing. I still think blind reviewing as well as reviewing with a context is important. You need so many different ways to get information about wine, both as people making it or groups making it and growing it, getting information and feedback on how your wine's resonating, but also for people who are looking to buy it. I tend to like what Tim Atkin recommends. So what did he say about these wines from, Central Otago? So I think you need all of it. And a lot of people who have never judged can be quite critical of judging because it is like speed dating in a way. But so often I see consistent wines coming through that are the same ones, that are being reviewed positively. So I think it is one important way of getting and giving feedback. And if it's your thing, it's a heck of a lot of fun, and you learn from other people, other palates, and it's a way to really groom your palate. Taste 200 wines in a day, and your palate is you're either going to decide, I'm never doing that again. Please send the helicopter and get me out of here. Or your palate's going to
200 Sauvignon Blancs.
Yeah. You don't want to brush your teeth for a week after that.
Yeah.
But I just love it. I think you're probably getting I love the people aspect of everything I do with wine.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, I just mentioned Sauvignon Blanc. I mean, it overwhelmingly dominates the New Zealand wine industry, not obviously Central, where, as you said, 80% is Pinot Noir. But how's the industry going to evolve, do you think, over the next 20 years? I mean, you probably still got another 20 years of winemaking in you. How do you see it evolving in your lifetime? Will New Zealand move away from Sauvignon Blanc and do other things, do you think?
In a way, we kind of already have, so if Sauvignon Blanc, 75%, these are rough numbers. I'm not a statistician, but if 75% of wine in New Zealand is Sauvignon Blanc and the majority of that is from the Marlborough region, well, we've already, started Central Otago, Waitaki Valley, you've got Waiheke, you've got a lot of other small areas as well that are focused on different varieties and possibly different price points. So I think Sauvignon Blanc has been is an amazing wine for New Zealand because it has a uniqueness here, and it put us on a map in ways that opened the door for places like Central Otago with our Pinot Noir and other things, or Hawke's Bay with Bordeaux and Syrah, and Chardonnay is a magnificent variety. We could talk all day about Chardonnay in New Zealand, the undersung hero. So I think that Sauvignon Blanc will remain an important part of New Zealand wine. But what I think needs to be the focus in the next 5 years, I'll just speak in shorter increments, is we need to be able to, at least speaking of what I know, Central Otago, we need to be able to articulate our uniqueness. We need to be able to communicate better and differently, not only because the younger demographic has different ideas about alcohol, different ideas about what's important, what they're interested in, but also it's just so boring talking about cherries and strawberries. I encourage people to talk about how wine resonates, what it makes them feel, the memory, the situational things that wine brings about. Because your cherry could be my plum. At the end of the day, there's fruit in there, or there's savory, or, there's a bit of barnyard or whatever. But also then link it back to, but where is this from? What piece of land? What human hands were involved with this? Or what's the uniqueness of that? What made this wine what it is? Was it machines? Or was it a soil? Was it a group of people with a collective idea about making something beautiful together? So I think it's digging deeper than just what's good, or definition of what's good anyway. I mean, we simplify language about wine so much, and I'm guilty of it just as everyone else is. So I think New Zealand's a tiny country in the world wine scale. And we have a massive opportunity to be different. And I think we need to lead that in how we communicate, full stop, but certainly about our differences. And if we don't do that, nobody's going to know, and somebody else is going to do it better. So I think we're in a real crux time here, and I think we'll succeed, but we need to basically work harder, I think, and work smarter.
Yeah. And I think what you said, talking about place, I mean, at Valley, you make four very different Pinots. If you think Bannockburn and Gippsland and Bendigo and Waitaki Valley, you're expressing place through those wines, aren't you?
Yeah, and that's how Grant established Valley, because, working in Oregon and Burgundy, places that I, a decade or so later, didn't follow in his footsteps because I didn't know him at the time, but we have very similar sort of backgrounds in terms of where in the world we've worked and what kind of Pinot Noir maker or, types of styles of Pinot Noir makers we worked with. So he set us on the pathway from the beginning to only make premium wine. So it's not about, wine to drink today for a year and wine to save for 10 years and then wine to drink in 5, different prices, all of that. It's just, we make the wine that we think best expresses a growing area in a season. And seasonality is something that I think has been more of a focus of ours, certainly in my time, because we do get these erratic seasons and we are making a product of a season. And so if you don't embrace seasonality, and otherwise Valley could get boring. I mean, our wines wouldn't get boring, but it's like, oh yeah, I've done Valley. What's next? But if every year Valley's showcasing the nuance of a different season, then you can find something new every year when you try a different Valley. And so for me, it was a very clever, insightful decision that Grant made to put us on this pathway.
Last question is, how do you get away from wine? I know your husband skis for a living and you're a very outdoors person. You've got your dogs, you like walking, you're pretty fit, you've always liked the outdoors. How do you get away from wine? Is that your main escape route?
Yeah, mainly just, I fortunately, winter, I don't do the pruning, so winter's a bit on the quiet side here. So I really am fairly mad about skiing. And then, I live in a beautiful place with lakes and rivers all around. So often this time of year, I'm either walking the dogs or on a mountain bike or up climbing some big steep hill with some friends. So the outdoors, and that was the other draw to this place, is that you can have, this amazing natural wonder all around you, so much sporty opportunity, but you're constantly in awe of the grandeur and the beauty of the place. And that's quite inspirational when you're growing and making something that's a product of that place. So when you can feel, in every step that you take here, that sort of awe, then it's quite inspirational for what you do in the winery. Because if you're inspired by the grandeur around you, then you respect it, right? And you let that grandeur be. You don't try and make a wine. You let the place give you a wine that you can have fun guiding into a glass and bottle.
I love that. It's a good point at which to stop. Grandeur, be in awe of the grandeur of the place and the grandeur of the wine. Jen, thanks so much for sharing your time with us. You need to go and get some sleep because it's getting on 11 o'clock. It's past 11 o'clock, past your bedtime. See you very soon. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and stay well.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
What an inspiring story. It just proves that you should always follow your dreams. Next week on Cork Talk, my guest is the renowned Chilean winemaker, Toti Unduraga. Join me then. Thanks for listening to Cork Talk. If you want to read more reports, articles and tasting notes by me, go to my website, timatkin.com. You can also follow me on Twitter @timatkin and on Instagram @timatkinmw. See you next week.